Hey everybody, welcome back to Build It with Tim. On today's episode, we're building a moving and packing app. So guess who is moving? I'll be moving in just a couple weeks. As you can see behind me, I've already started clearing a lot of stuff out of the house, and I need a way to manage all of the items in the house, what bins, what boxes are going into, and how to keep track of things through the moving process. Okay, so as usual, we're going to take a look at the finished application first, and then we'll dive into the builder in order to get started. All right, so let's check it out. All right, so inside of our moving and packing app here, we have the ability to add containers, whether this is a bin, box, or some bulk item. We can choose the container type, where the location of the container, and what room it either came out of or is going to, or both. So in this case, we'll add a new container. It'll be a box, and let's say this belongs to the living room. When we add a new container, we can then add an item to the container. So we'll say books, toys, blankets, etc. You can add all of the items that you need for this particular container that you have packed into the container. And then back on the containers page, you have the ability to manage your containers and search between the container number or the items inside. So if I want to see what containers contain blankets, you can see bin number 2 from the master bedroom has blankets. Container number 4 from the living room has blankets. Okay, we also have a packing list page, which is a list of all containers that have items and are at the location that we are loading a truck from. We can print the packing list as a PDF so that we can mark off the inventory as we load a truck, and we can mark off the inventory when we unload a truck. Okay, and lastly, we have a page of QR codes where we can run a scheduled task to populate the QR code and then print the QR codes so that we can actually cut them up, tape them on a box, and then be able to scan the box with your phone in order to see what's inside. All right, so we're going to start from scratch for this app, meaning we're going to create the data structure and the page structure ourselves from scratch. And we're going to go through step by step. So step number 1, we're going to build out the basic data structure inside of the data builder. Step number 2, we're going to build out the basic page structure with various workflows and functions. So the workflows and functions that we're going to need for this particular app, we need to list all of our containers, whether that's a box or a bin or like a loose item, like something large, like a kid toy playhouse, something like that. We need the ability to add new containers. We then need the ability to view the details of those containers and add items to the containers. We need the ability to edit the item inside the container, such as editing the name or moving it between containers. We also need the ability to delete an item from a container or remove it from a container. And lastly, we need some functionality to search across the containers and the items. So if we want to look for arts and crafts, for example, we want to return what bins or boxes any items containing the words arts and crafts can be found. Step number 3 is going to be adding some QR code functionality. So what I've done for the bins and the boxes that I am packing is they all have QR codes that I can print and tape to the front of the box. That way, when the boxes are in the garage or in storage or wherever these bins and boxes are, I can take out my phone, I can scan that QR code, it will open up the app and show me exactly what's inside. And last but not least, to help with the actual moving process itself, step 4 is going to be adding a packing list PDF that I can print and I can give to the moving company so that they know exactly what items are accounted for, the bins and the boxes, their numbers, where they go and once we arrive in the new house, and of course give them the ability to monitor that inventory through the loading and unloading process. So let's get going inside of the actual builder with starting our app. Moving and packing manager is what we're going to call this app, and we're going to create it from scratch. Let's start with some simple cleanup here of deleting the sample data table and the sample pages, We are not going to need these. We're going to build everything ourselves. So we'll delete the table and the pages. Now, for the data structure, we only need two simple tables. In this case, we need a table for the containers, right? This is the bins, the boxes, or any large loose items. We can create that table, and the second table is going to be the actual items in the containers. So right off the bat, we're going to have a connection from the item to the container. But first, I actually want to change the kind of primary field for the container table. And rather than container name, I'm going to use a number. Container number, and we don't need any decimal places or any additional formatting. That's all we're going to need. And I'll delete the container name field. Now that we have that, we want to use that as our display field. So we'll go to the items table, and we will then add our connection from items to containers. And our display field in this case is now going to be that container number field we just created. Okay, we are going to keep the item name text field here, but first let's go back and fill out the rest of our container table. And so the first field that we're going to need is going to be an option field. It can be a radio or a select field. It doesn't matter. What we want to track here is the container type. Okay, so whether it is a bin, a box, or just a loose item. So we can just call this item. And we can give these color badges to help us out. Your choice for the colors. And we can move on to the next field. We're going to continue on with option fields here where we want to know the location of the container. So whether this is in the house or whether it's in a storage unit. Again, we can use color labels here to make this easier for us. And the last option field we're going to need here, again, we'll do another radio, is the room in which it came from or it's going to. So let's go to the quick edit section here so we can add a bunch of options. We'll do garage, kitchen, master bedroom, bedroom 1, bedroom 2, living room, and we can do like miscellaneous or something. These are going to be our options. So again, when we are packing the house, we're going to know kind of where things came from. And then when we are unpacking a truck or something, a moving truck, we're going to know where things are going to be placed. And the last thing I'm going to build on this particular table at the moment is going to be a roll-up of the items. So for every item that we add, it's going to have a connection to one of the containers. And I can use a roll-up field to get all of the item names and concat them together. So we're going to do that by selecting the items table, and we're going to choose the item name that we want to concatenate here, and the value separator in this case is fine with a comma for now. All right, so just as a test, what we're going to do is we're going to add a new container. So we'll just do this is container number 1, and it can be a bin. It's in the house and it goes in the garage. Now when I add a new item to bin number 1 or container number 1, you can see that it's going to tell us tools. And then if I add another item, now we have this comma separated list of all of the items inside of that particular container. Okay, so let's get rid of our items here for now because we're going to add those again later. And our container. So that's basically it for the data structure right now. Now, in step 3 and step 4, when we're doing the QR code stuff and the PDF stuff, we might going to come back here and we're going to add some kind of utility fields that we're going to need. But as far as the kind of basic workflows go, this is all that we're going to need. All right, so moving on to step 2, we now have to build out the basic page structure that we're going to need. Now, I know I mentioned all the workflows and functions at the start of the video, but just to recap them a little bit, we need a way to add and manage our containers. We need to list all of our containers so that we can view the details of those containers, see what's inside, and add and edit items inside the container. So let's head over to the page builder, and we're going to start by adding a page of containers. We can keep this on the default layout, and we'll add this to our menu. And for this particular build, I'm going to choose a list component because I want the containers to show up as like cards on the page. So we're going to choose containers as our data table and click save. Once inside our list component, we can start to modify this and kind of configure it to our likings. So let's call this, well, we could just call the title, we'll just say containers to keep it simple. And let's jump over to the layouts tab here and choose 3 columns so that we show 3 columns of containers. And that way things will fit on the page a little bit better. And before we configure all of our fields, let's go to the data source and we'll sort by container number. So we want to see the most recent container first. So we'll sort into descending order by container number. Okay, now for the fields, what you want to show here is, I guess, up to you. In my case, I just want to see the container number. I want to see whether it's a bin or a box. And, well, let's put them all here, I suppose. Container number, container type, location, and the room. So when we're looking at this, this app in the live app section, we're going to see all 4 of those fields. And lastly, we will open up the links in HTML section here, and we're going to add a record detail page. So we're going to say view items is what this is going to be called. And I would typically like to hide the column title for buttons, and we'll do an icon here. And let's change our format. So rather than inline, we'll choose block so that it makes the button full width of the list item. We'll make it large, and primary color is fine. So the next thing we need on this page is the ability to add a new container. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make this a separate page. So we'll do add container, and we can put this on our menu as well. And this is going to be a form for the container data table. We can delete the items field from the form because it's not going to actually populate until after we add items to the container. So we don't need it in this particular form. We do need these items here though when we're adding a new container. And then we'll set up a submit rule to go to an existing page. And in this case, we're going to go to that container details page so that after you add the container, you're going to jump right into the page that lets you add items to the container. All right, so in the actual live app now, I just want to test out this particular piece of functionality first before we actually go into the container detail page. So let's go to our add container form here, and we'll add that first bin. Now we'll start with 1. It's worth noting that you could choose an auto increment for this particular field rather than a number input. That's entirely up to you. I wanted a little bit more control for it, so I wanted to just type in the next number. And let's say this is for the kitchen. Okay, so here's our container detail page. Now we're going to clean up this detail component a little bit, restyle it a bit, and then we'll have more components down in this empty space below it where we can add items, search items, and manage the items. So on our container detail page, let's first start with the detail component. So I'm just going to remove everything and add a row back. And we're going to display it like this, I think. So we'll do these 4 fields here. Now we don't need to list the items again because they're going to all be listed below. But what we're going to do is we're actually going to take this, resize it to half the page, add a new column, resize it to half the page, and we're going to add a form to add a new connected item. So we're going to choose this option here, add a new item connected to this container. And from here, we can then, we actually don't need a container number. All we need is the item name. By default, through this data source that we selected, that connection from item to container is going to be made automatically. So we'll just change the title of the form, and we are good to go there. So refreshing this page now, we have our container details and the ability to add an item. Before we do that, let's add a new row to the page, and we will create another list component that's going to show those connected items. We'll change the title to just items, and then we can just list out the item name. Below that, we're going to add 2 buttons. We're going to add an edit link and a delete link so that we can manage the item, whether we want to rename the item or move it to a different container, or if we want to delete that item altogether. So in my case, I've been going through some bins that I had packed away in storage already, and there's some items that I just donated or threw out. So I deleted the item entirely from the app itself. So moving on to kind of styling these particular buttons. Again, I'm going to hide. I'm going to give it a title, but then hide the title. And we can do an edit pencil, and we'll change this to a button and give it the same treatment that we did before. A block style to make it full width, make it large. And in this case, we'll do info for the color. And delete is going to have a trash icon, hide the title, make it a button, make it full width, make it large, and change it to danger. All right, so now back on this page, we can now start to add items. So again, for example purposes, we are packing a bin for the kitchen. So let's do plates, bowls, silverware. Okay. That's all we need for this. I do want to style this a little bit differently. I can see 2 things on the page that I want to do already. Number one, I'm going to actually remove this link, and we'll center the items here. So back in our page builder, we'll start by removing the link on the form, and that's under the options tab of our form, and we'll hide the back to link. And then for the list component, we'll change the design. We can change the font size if we want to. So let's try something a little bit larger and align everything to the center. And I think that's okay now. So we'll be able to kind of see things a little bit clearer. And next we will do the edit form, and the delete, we don't have to do anything. So we'll just do edit. All right, so before we actually go into the edit page itself, what I want to do is I want to come back to the edit link itself, and I want to enable show in pop-up. So when somebody clicks on the edit link, it's going to show up in a modal pop-up as opposed to an entirely new page. And from here, I can modify this form if I want to. All I want to do here is just stack the fields like that, the container number and the item name below it, giving us the ability to edit both. So by changing the container number, maybe from bin number 1 to bin number 2, that signals that we've actually moved the item to a new container. And by editing the item name if we want to give that ability as well. All right, and just to show you what that looks like in the app itself, I can now click on edit item, and we can move this. Now we don't have any other containers that we need to move it to at the moment, and that's okay. But if we want to change something, kitchen utensils. All right, for the next functions or workflows inside of the page builder, we're going to go back to the main containers page. So from here, I want to be able to search that items rollup field and return the containers that contain my search criteria. All right, now before we actually add this search capability, I'm going to do something with the data structure itself on the container table. This rollup is great for what it does, but I want to actually kind of manipulate how it outputs the values here. So I'm going to do 2 things. Number one, I'm going to actually edit the items field itself, and I'm going to use this particular HTML tag here as a value separator. This is a break separator. So I want to force things into a new line rather than do comma separation. And since this output contains some HTML, I can actually choose our equation field, and we can essentially re-output the rollup field in this case. as HTML. So if I change the row height here, you're going to see that it takes this and now it spits it out as a new line. So bowls, kitchen utensils, and plates. What that also allows us to do is search against the equation field using the operator of contains. So we're back on our containers page now, and I'm going to add a row above it and add a search component. We'll choose the container table, and we will customize this. So search containers and items. We'll add our container number and our items equation field. So we can actually just rename that to make it look a little prettier. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to give predefined operators. So I only want to show contains. This will give me a text input. I don't need to choose all of these different operators. I only want contains in this case, so we're just going to do that. And then for the item number, we'll do the same, except we'll choose is. So when we want to search for an exact number, 34 or something, then it will just return it because we are using the operator of is. And then we'll go to search results and make sure that we connect this search component to our container list. Okay, so we only have one container here, so let's go ahead and add a new one. Container 2 is a bin, house, and let's say it's part of the master bedroom in this case. So we'll add some items. We'll do blankets, pillows, and sure, blankets and pillows are from the master bedroom and bin number 2. If I go back to my container page here and I want to find blanket, we're searching for any instances where that equation field contains the word blanket, and it's returning container number 2. If I want to do kitchen, as I think I called kitchen utensils, right? Then it will return container number 1 because inside is an item called kitchen utensils. And then, of course, if I want to search directly on the container number, I can do that search for 2, and it will return 2. Right, now, the last page that I'm going to set up is what I'm just going to call packing list. Okay, it's going to be, rather than a list component, we're going to do a table component. And we want to show this page because it's just going to show all of the items that that we have packed and are in the house. You know, it's basically an inventory of what we're ready to move. So let's add another page, and we'll call this packing list. And again, add it to our menu. We can choose a table this time, and it's going to be, again, we're going to choose containers. Let's change the name of the table to packing list. And in this case, the purpose of this table is we're going to show all of the container information and the items inside. And we're going to use that equation field again because we want the items to be listed as each on their own line. So we'll just choose the items equation field, rename it here, and we are good to go. Actually, we're not. We want to change the sort by. So sort by container, and let's go ascending order in this case. So we'll start with 1 and go upwards. So we'll check out what this looks like now. We have packing list, and here's everything that we have. So we have 2 records, right? 2 containers, and here you can see the items inside. So that's exactly what we want to see. Now later on, we're going to do a little bit of some other kind of utility manipulation fields to mark whether or not a container is actually full, if it's packed, or if it's empty. So I'm personally running into some issues when I'm actually using this app in real life, where I have bins that were emptied after we moved into the place we're in now. The bins were emptied, like for the kids, like we took out toys and never really did anything with the bin afterwards, but it still has a number on it. So that bin is now empty, but inside the app, I never actually deleted the item. So I'm running into some issues where I don't know what bin is full and what's not when looking at the app. So I want to make sure that we kind of include that here, and that's going to be through some other utility fields, as I mentioned. And we'll set that up when we go back into our data table for the QR code stuff and PDF stuff. All right, so with that said, we're ready for step 3, which is building out the QR code functionality. So what I'm doing with this app is I'm actually creating QR codes for each container, printing them, taping them to the front of the boxes, and that way I can scan it with my phone and see what's inside. I don't have to unstack things to see what's inside. It's really, really helpful and awesome. So let's go ahead and get started on that. Pretty simple to set up. Again, we just need some kind of utility stuff, right? So we need some purpose-built fields to work with the different functions and features that we have available to us. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go to pipes. We'll search for QR code or QR, and we have the barcode and QR generator. There is really no configuration that is necessary for this pipe. We can change some default information if you'd like. This is the one that we're going to be using here, generate base 64 QR code. So we can change the default size, margin if you want, but in this case, I'm just going to leave it. And the value and label parameters are coming from our app. So the value of the QR code is going to be a link back to the detail page. So I can view what's inside the container. And the label in this case, it will just be the container number. All right, so let's figure out how we can provide a detail link as the value. So we're going to need 2 fields for this, 2 fields and 1 rule. It can be a table rule or it could be a form rule. I will choose a table rule because I prefer it. Field number 1 is going to be a record ID. Now this is the internal record ID of the container. Just real quick, if I go to the live app and I go to container details of any of these containers, what I want in the end here is I want this full URL. This is the URL for the detail page of this specific container. Now, how is that determined? Well, we have our account slug, we have our app name, then we have our page slugs, container details, and then at the end here is the record ID for container number 1. That's an internal value, and we want to get that value and save it. So we've created the record ID text field, and we'll create a table rule to say every time a record is created, we are going to populate that text field with the record value of the record ID. Now in this case, I'm actually going to switch this to created and edited just because I need to historically populate these. But now that I know the record ID, I can use an equation field to build the rest of that link. So let's do detail link, and we need to add some more values to the record ID here. So let's go back to our live app and get that. So we need to take this whole value, or not the whole thing, we need to take everything except for the record ID. And let's put this in here. We are going to concatenate all this. So we will format this as such where we have, and I'll go over this in a second. I know I'm kind of skipping through some things here, but we have a text function called concat that can be found here under text functions. So concat, open parentheses. Now within the first set of quotes, we have the first value that we want to concatenate, and then we have a comma, and then we have the second value that we want to concatenate. Now this is a field, so we don't need to wrap it in quotes. It's wrapped in the curly brackets, and that will do just fine for what we need. And then I can validate it, hit save, and now we can see that we have this full link. So I could take this link, I could paste it into the browser, and this is going to take me to the detail page for container number 2. All right, so back on this page, now we need to actually work on the QR code. Now that we have the utility fields that we need to provide the correct values to the QR code, now we need to actually build the pipe into a table rule. Sorry, I actually misspoke. We are building the pipe into a task, and I'll get into some detail in a minute on why we're doing that. But after we do that, we need to return the base 64 value that we get from the pipe. And conveniently, it's going to be returned to us inside of an image tag as HTML. So we need to create one more field to actually store that HTML so that we can use it in the app later. So we're going to use a long text field for this, and QR base 64. And that's where we're going to store our value. So the reason I'm going to build this into a scheduled task as opposed to a table rule, our detail link is coming from an equation field. Now, equation fields don't populate until after record and table rules run. Okay, they will not populate until rules are finished running. So if we try to run that particular QR code pipe inside of table rules, it's going to get an empty value because that equation field hasn't been populated yet. So we need to go into our automation, schedule tasks, add a new task, and we'll do build QR codes. We can do this containers. Now I'm going to do two things with the task. Number one, we're going to trigger it on schedule. So we'll just have it run daily. So it'll just constantly, every day it'll give us new QR codes or update the QR codes. But on the page builder, I'm also going to add a button that allows us to trigger the task whenever we want. So when we go to print the page, if it's missing any values, we can trigger the task. It'll update the values. And now we have our QR code to print. So first we'll set this up to daily. And we'll set this to, I don't know, pick a time, I suppose. It could be anything. How about just midnight is fine. And our action is going to be update this record, add a pipe, choose barcode and QR code generator, base 64. Our two values are going to be, or rather our parameters are going to be value from the record value of the detail link and the label to the record value of the container number. Now, the pipe values that we are going to return and set are going to be to the long text base 64 field and the pipe response of the result. Okay, so just to show you what that looks like, we'll run this task now manually. And back on our container record here, you can see that we have this value populated in this long text field. It starts with an HTML image tag, and the source of the image is the base 64 QR code. Okay, so let's go to our page builder now. We'll add another page. We'll call this QR codes, and we'll add this to our menu again, and we're going to choose that list component and the containers table. And I'm going to show you now what that HTML field looks like. So we'll add the container. Actually, we don't need any of it. We do links in HTML, choose HTML, and now we're going to delete the text that's in here and add that QR base 64 field. We can hide the title on this. We're not going to need it. And let's take a look at what that looks like. All right, so my mistake on this, I forgot a piece. So we actually need to go back to our data builder. Now, in the same way that we took a value from this that contained HTML and outputted it as rendered HTML using an equation field, we need to do the same thing for our base 64 field here. So we're going to add another field, equation, and we'll call this QR code. Just QR code is fine. And we're going to add our base 64 field here, and we can validate it. And once we do, we now have that QR code here. Okay, so it's the equation field can actually render HTML. So since we have saved the HTML here, we can then render it with the equation field. So back on the QR codes page and our container list component, we are going to remove that, and we can then add the QR code field there. Okay, so now when we refresh this page, we should have our QR codes. Now let's say we add a new container, and this container, like I said, is not going to have a QR code yet because it's running on a scheduled task. If we go to our QR codes page, we don't have it. We have an empty record here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a row above this list component. I'm going to choose the task component. And this is actually going to let us run that task on demand. So we can add that there, refresh this page, and now we can run the task. And that's going to go through all of our container records, populate that particular field, or generate the QR code, populate the fields that we need. And now we have all 3 of our QR codes. Okay, so to make this a little bit cleaner too, we can just reformat this page. So let's do 3 columns and see how that looks. And that should give us a little bit nicer. So we'll one more thing we'll do is we will just align everything to the center. And now we have our QR codes. Now, this is great for us to look at our QR codes and just keep track of what we're doing inside of the app. To print the QR codes and other, like a packing list PDF, we are going to build PDFs inside the app using the PDF Pages 2.0. All right, so we're going to set up 2 PDFs for this, and we're going to go to the automation section of our app and PDF Pages. The first thing that we're going to do is create a layout if you don't have one already. I've created a default layout here. I chose a theme and just use the default margins. Now, I actually don't want a header or footer, so that's fine. We can turn that off. Once I have a layout, we can add a new PDF page. Now, again, there's going to be 2 that we're going to do here. The first one is going to be QR codes, and it's going to be a list type PDF, meaning we want to just print all of the container records. So we're going to choose list. On this page, we're going to build it basically the same way we did as for the app page, where we have a list component of containers. We don't really need a title for this. And we're going to add that QR code field here. Actually, sorry, we're going to do that inside of an HTML component or HTML field. And we'll add that QR code. And we're good to go here. So we can download a preview of this to see what it's going to look like. And there is our QR codes. Now, a couple things I see I need to do. I need to hide the title of the HTML field itself. But you can see we have our QR code and the value of the container number. And I left the list layout here with the borders on it so that I would know where to cut it. All right, so now that we have our page actually built, our PDF page, we can go back to our page builder, and on the containers or the QR code app page here, we're going to add a PDF print button so that we can then print our QR codes. Okay, back on our app here, we can select print QR codes, and that will generate this for us, allowing us to print the QR codes, and then we can cut them up, tape them on, and we're good to go. All right, now the last thing that we want to do is our packing list PDF. Now again, the purpose of the packing list PDF here and the packing list page in general is to compare our actual inventory with how it's getting transported, right? So if you have a moving company or something that's going to be taking all of your items, then you might want to give them an inventory list of bins that are packed and bins that are currently located at your residence. So as they get put on a truck, you can mark them off a list and say, yes, this one is accounted for. And then when it comes off the truck, yes, this one is accounted for. So we have our field here called items, which is giving us a text value of all of the items inside the container. We're going to make another roll-up field here, and we're going to call this total items. And it's going to be basically the same thing, where we're going to look at the items table, and this time we are going to count the record. So count all of the items that are in the container and give us a number in return. So you can see we have total items here, 0, 2, and 3. Now our container status field is going to look like this. If our total items field is greater than 0, we're going to return packed. Otherwise, we're going to return empty. Okay, we can validate that equation. And now when we look at our table again, we have this. So 0 returns empty, but if this value is greater than 0, it will return packed. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's full, right? But it has items. We want to know if it has items. Back in our page builder, our packing list, we're going to filter this data source. When we're looking at our packing list, we only want to see containers that are at the house. Okay, so if you have things that are in a storage unit or something, those are maybe not being moved right now, or they're in another location, whatever. We only want to see containers that are at the house, and we only want to see containers where the container status contains packed. Okay, and by doing that, when we look at our packing list, it's only going to show us the containers that we actually need to move, right? Because container number 3 has no items. We don't need to move it. This is our inventory. All right, so for printing this as a PDF, we're going to do almost the exact same thing that we did for the QR codes here, where we're going to go to Automation, PDF Pages, add a new PDF page, and this we'll call Packing List. And again, this is going to be a list type PDF because we want to show all of our containers. We're going to choose a table component of containers, container number, what room it came from or it's going to, and the items inside. So again, we're going to choose the equation version of this field because we want this to be broken into new lines. So we can rename this again, of course, so just call it items. And we're going to apply the same data source filters that we just did. So what is it? Location is house. And container status contains packed. Okay, now from the packing list page, again, we can add that print PDF button. This time we're going to choose the packing list and we'll say print packing list. And we will give ourselves what we need. So again, on the live app, we'll go back to packing list, print the packing list, and now we'll have the PDF of our inventory. All right, now from here, the app is basically done. So to recap, let's run through all of the functionality for the particular app that we've just built. All right, so inside of our moving and packing app here, we have the ability to add containers, whether this is a bin, box, or some bulk item. We can choose the container type, where the location of the container, and what room it either came out of or is going to, or both. So in this case, we'll add a new container. It'll be a box, and let's say this belongs to the living room. When we add a new container, we can then add an item to the container. So we'll say books, toys, blankets, etc. You can add all of the items that you need for this particular container that you have packed into the container. And then back on the containers page, you have the ability to manage your containers and search between the container number or the items inside. So if I want to see what containers contain blankets, you can see bin number 2 from the master bedroom has blankets. Container number 4 from the living room has blankets. Okay, we also have a packing list page, which is a list of all containers that have items and are at the location that we are loading a truck from. We can print the packing list as a PDF so that we can mark off the inventory as we load a truck, and we can mark off the inventory when we unload a truck. Okay, and lastly, we have a page of QR codes where we can run a scheduled task to populate the QR code, and then print the QR codes so that we can actually cut them up, tape them on a box, and then be able to scan the box with your phone in order to see what's inside. All right, so that's it for this week's episode of Build It with Tim. If you are moving, I hope you find this particular kind of app useful. I know that I will when I move in a couple weeks. It's certainly going to make our lives so much easier through the entire process. All right, so thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Take care.